Hello, my name is Luke, and today we've got a list of the top, 10 or so games that may or may not fit in your pocket, but they fit in mine, and I like them. Let's just get started. Before we get down to the top 10-ish list, I want to give this little game an honorable mention slot, because although it's almost pocket size, it's just barely too thick to fit in my pocket. I still want to tell you about it though, because it's great. This game's called Friday. It's by Friedman Freeze, and it is a solo adventure. So you play it by yourself. It's a deck builder, which means you'll start with a bunch of cards that are pretty terrible, and you will, over the course of the game, you will change the contents of your deck to get rid of the terrible cards, like very stupid, and modify what your deck consists of so that you'll have a better and better opportunity to overcome challenges that you're faced with. The theme of this game is that you are playing as Friday, trying to help Robinson Crusoe survive on his island. And the way that's going to happen is throughout the game, you'll be presented with the choice of a couple different challenges. And you can choose out of the two challenges which one you want to try to overcome. And if you overcome a challenge, then you get to flip over the card and add it to the supply of cards that you are using in your deck. And many of these cards will have a value that you can use to overcome challenges, or they will have special abilities, or they will have special abilities. This one example gives you life. Other cards will let you exchange cards for the next one in the deck to try to get the card you want, or they'll let you destroy cards so that you can start to pare down the terrible cards out of your deck so that you can have a higher concentrated good cards deck. Over the course of your game, these challenges will get harder and harder until you're finally faced with the problem of pirates. And once you defeat both pirate ships that you're faced with, if you survive that long, you'll win the game. I've spent so much time playing this game. It is one of my favorite solo games, and it's so small that it makes it almost in my top 10 pocket games. The almost isn't because of how good it is, because it is a wonderful game. The almost is just because it almost fits in my pocket. The next game on the top, however many pocket games, conveniently has the word pocket within the name, and that's Hive Pocket. The way I've described this game to most of the people that I've played with is it's like playing a game of chess with a bag of bugs, because all these little tiles in the bag have bugs. Well, I suppose some people don't consider spiders bugs, but for the purpose of this game, spiders are bugs. Alright, so you might have spiders, you'll have grasshoppers, you'll have ants, you'll have beetles, you'll have ladybugs, you'll have mosquitoes, and all of these different pieces have their own special movement abilities. And you'll be using those special movement abilities to try to surround the queen bee of your opponent. In the first 4 turns, you'll just be putting one more of your bugs out on the hive. But as the game goes on your turn, you'll either move one of the bugs using their special abilities. For example, the grasshopper can hop over a hive, even if that's one space or if that's several spaces. The grasshopper could hop over the hive. The spider can move 3 spaces around the edge. The ladybug, for example, will walk on top of the hive and then take a step down. The beetle can only move 1 step, but it can go on the side or it can go on top of the hive. And the mosquito can take the ability of whatever insect it is next to. And so if you're next to this grasshopper, you can hop all the way over there. You wouldn't want to do that in this particular case because you're trying to surround your opponent's queen bee. But all that being said, on your turn, you'll either move one of your insects, or you'll take one more of your insects and bring it to the table so you have more insects in the hive that you're trying to use. This game feels very tactical. If you want to play a game of chess, but you are in the park and it is windy, it's hard to do. If you want to play a card game in the park and it's windy, it's hard to do. But if you're playing with these little tiles, they've got some weight to them, they're not going to blow away, and it's just a really fun game. So if someone ever says, hey, you want to play chess with a bag of bugs, you should take them up on it, because this is fun. The next game on the list of good games that will probably fit in your pocket, especially this one because it's a very small box, is Mint Works. It's got a strange name, but it's got an interesting history as well. When this game first came out, it was a print and play game. So you would print out the little components and you would use Altoids mints, looking something like this, as your player tokens, and the whole game would fit in a mint tin. That's how I got started with this game. But then, enough people liked the game enough that they decided to make a retail version and had it professionally printed. This is a worker placement game where you're going to be using your mints, these little guys that you'll gain one of or more every turn. You will use your mints to do different actions. You can use them to produce more mints. You can use them to buy the blueprints for improvements to your neighborhood, or you can use them to build those blueprints, turn them into improvements, new buildings in your neighborhood. These improvements might give you victory points, these little stars. They might be like this mine where they produce new mints on each turn. Or they might be like this lotto, which opens up a new location that you could start using in the future. This lotto in particular would let you spend 3 mints to get whatever the next blueprint is out of the set of blueprints that you're going through on a given turn. And so it's a little bit of a risk, but you might get something that normally costs 5. Again, it's a great game. It goes from 1 to 4 people. So if you've got a group of 4 people, you can all play it together. Or you can play against these very clever AI players. Just one card that gives the personality traits of that AI. It gives what they prioritize when it comes to these actions, and it gives what they prioritize in terms of what kind of improvements that they're going to try to build in their neighborhood. All this stuff, all this game, fits in a container that now is just a little bit bigger than a mint tin. But it definitely still fits in your pocket. That's Mint Works. There's another game by the same company called Mint Delivery, and it's another game that's the same size box. I don't have that game. I haven't played it. However, it is a pick up and deliver type game that fits in the same little form factor. So I'd check out either one of those games because they're good travel games. The next game to fit in your pocket is Star Realms. Well, it's a little bit big for maybe your pocket, but I wear cargo pants, so it fits in my pocket. Anyway, this is Star Realms. It's a wonderful science fiction themed game of battleships and aliens and exploring the galaxy, but more than anything, it's a deck builder, which means you're going to start out with a small number of relatively useless cards, and you are going to use them to purchase more and more higher quality cards in order to defeat your opponents. So you start out with, well, not these ones, I added those. You'll start out with about 10 cards that are only a little bit powerful. They can either attack your opponent or they can be used as money to purchase new cards. And as you're playing, you'll be recruiting things from 4 different factions. We've got a mercantile type faction that has a lot of drawing cards and making the opponent lose cards. We've got an imperial style faction that has a lot of healing and a lot of purchase power. We've got this faction of mechano style creatures, sort of like the Borg on Star Trek. And we've got these aliens, these blobs that are all about doing damage to your opponent. And throughout the course of the game, you're going to be purchasing these upgrades. Some of them are ships, some of them are worlds, they're outposts, some of them are space stations, and you're going to use them to make yourself as powerful as you can and use them to overcome the authority of your opponent. Now that's the one thing that's sort of a drawback about this game, is their concept of authority. It's basically like health points on any other game. But let's say you have 31 health. You'd represent that by using this 20 and this 10 and the 1. If you get 2 more health, then you'll have all these different cards that are being used to keep track of your health or your authority. For me, what I did is I went on the Game Crafter and I made some little cards that you can use to represent your health. So if you have, let's say, 34 health, you just put the 30 on the 4. And if you gain 3 health, you can just 1, 2, 3. I'll put the link for these cards in the show notes. And so that's my solution to not having to use these ungainly cards. But the people that made this game, White Wizard Games is the name of the company. The people that made this game were coming out with some expansions. And so they made another game called Colony Wars, Star Realms Colony Wars. And if you put that game and this game together, you can play it 4-player, whereas using just this base game, it's just a 2-player game. So you can play this game with 2 players with the original box. You can get a second box or that expansion to play it with up to 4 players. But when White Wizard Games wanted to come out with their next version of the game, they listened to the people's ideas on the changes, sort of like those little scoring cards that I had on this. So when they came out with their expansion, well, they came out with their next version of it. It's not an expansion. This one is Star Realms is a sci-fi theme. Hero Realms took what they learned from making this deck builder to make a new one. And in Hero Realms, it's very much the same game, but in a fantasy world. So they've got orcs and goblins and dragons and all kinds of weird creatures, elves, and wolf men, all kinds of weird creatures. But one thing that, so you're going to be recruiting those instead of spaceships and star bases. You're going to be recruiting these fantasy creatures. But with this game, they took that same idea that I had mentioned, the new scorecards, and they built them in to this base game. And so if you've got knocked down to 5 points, you just set that to 5 and set that to 0. So it's just the same as those cards that I'd made on this. Honestly, I just got the idea from these guys because I bought this game first because I generally like fantasy more than I like sci-fi. But they're both wonderful games. And so this game, it's the same type of deck builder. You're starting off with some gold, maybe a dagger and a short sword. So you've got just a little tiny bit of attack and a little tiny bit of purchasing power. And you're going to use them to recruit all kinds of creatures. Bribery, elven gifts, nature's bounty, a street thug, using intimidation. So just like Star Realms, you're going to use those small cards that you started with to buy these bigger and better and more powerful cards. And if you like sci-fi, go with Star Realms. If you like fantasy, go with Hero Realms. Star Realms is the only one officially on the Pocket list because it'll fit in your pocket, whereas Hero Realms might be a little bit too big for it. But White Wizard Games, after they built Star Realms, they learned from their customers, learned from their players. They used those new knowledge to build Hero Realms, and then after Hero Realms got built last year, they came out with Star Realms Frontiers, which is basically Star Realms and Hero Realms mixed together. The theme is more Star Realms, but all the things that they learned while making Hero Realms, they used to make a new version of Star Realms in Star Realms Frontier. So this one, like Hero Realms, plays up to 4 players out of the box. And this box hasn't been opened yet because I'm going to wait until I can play it with my brother. But we have Star Realms for in your pocket, Hero Realms for fantasy, Star Realms Frontier for a bigger, better version of Star Realms. And they're all just wonderful games. I'd recommend any of these if you like deck builders. The next game on the list of great games that will fit in your pocket is Sprawlopolis. This is a city-building cooperative game from 1 to 4 players. In this game, which definitely will fit in your pocket, in this game you're trying to build a city based on certain parameters that change every time you play. When you start the game, you just shuffle your cards, and you will deal out 3 goal cards, or objective cards. And in these objective cards, they give you an example of what things will score points for that game. For example, this is the Bloom Boom, and you're trying to, within your cityscape, have 3 parks on given rows or columns. The Master Planner is trying to have a lot more residential areas in your city than the industrials. Each one of these cards has a different goal, which makes it so when you're building the city with the rest of the cards, every time you play, it's a completely different game. A game that I lose most of the time, but it's a blast. It starts out with just a single card on the table, and then you will draw up until you have 3 cards, and you will choose one of these cards to place on the other card. You can put the card next to it, I'll just do that. You could put the card next to it. You could overlap half of it. You could overlap a corner. You could put it above it. And you're trying to reach different goals. This particular area would maybe be working towards having the biggest commercial zone. The blue areas are commercial, green are parks, gray is industrial, and orange is residential. And as you take a turn, you'll choose a card, and you just place it somewhere on this board or somewhere on the table. And it's good to get a lot of one particular type together because that gets you points. It's good to have efficient use of roads because that gets you so many points. And then each of these new goals will get you a different number of points. And so there's always new goals, always new challenges, always new things to try to hold in your brain. That's the part that always gets me. I always think of some goals and I forget the other goals. I did a full playthrough of this game on the channel, and so I will link to that in the show notes. But for the time being, I want to tell you about something else that's a fun feature of this game. Sprawlopolis is published by Button Shy Games, and they are famous for having their games that will fit in these little wallets. So most of their games are going to fit on this list of games that are pocket games. But this game especially, and the game that came out before this, Circle the Wagons, they both are very highly rated, and so I'd recommend either one of these. Sprawlopolis is a cooperative game of laying out your little city. Circle the Wagons is very similar to Sprawlopolis, and they've got the same designers. Circle the Wagons is a competitive game, whereas Sprawlopolis is a cooperative game. So if you and a friend want to work together, you grab this one out of your pocket. If you want to go against each other, you'll grab that one. They're both great games. And another thing that Button Shy Games does is they make their games available as print and play games. And so, for example, when I backed Sprawlopolis on Kickstarter, I was going to have to wait a couple months for that game to be produced and to be shipped, but I was able to print the game out and play it very soon after the design was finished. So I got to print these out and make my own cards, and it's the exact same game, but a homemade version of it. Most of their games, the physical copy is maybe $12. The print and play is like $3, and so it is a couple great options that you can use if you want to play the game now, or if you want a nice retail version. All three of these would come highly recommended by me. Check out Button Shy Games, and specifically Sprawlopolis and Circle the Wagons. Alright, the next game that will fit in your pocket is this one called Palm Island. And it's called Palm Island for the dual reason that it's dealing with tropical islands such as palm trees, but also this game will fit in the palm of your hand. You don't even need a table to play this game. One thing you might notice if you saw the Sprawlopolis pocket wallet, Palm Island uses the same kind of pocket wallet for the solo version, which is the main way that I play this game. And you've got about 17 cards that are in your hand, and you are going to progress through your deck 8 times, upgrading your island, upgrading your little colony on your island, and the way that the resources work in this game is really clever. So I'd want to go through a couple rounds of this. So we've got our first round, we stick it in the back. When we get all the way back to to the top, we'll flip it over because we'll be in our second round, etc. Third round, fourth round. And once we finish 8 rounds, we're done, and we hope we have enough points to get to whatever arbitrary goal we've set for ourselves. But if you look at this game, and we'll see if we can get the autofocus, it shows some wood and some fish, and it has that little symbol right there, and it shows wood, fish, and stone, and this little symbol. And what it means is if you spend a wood and a fish, you could flip the card over. So when you put it like this, now it's going to start producing wood and fish. If this card made it all the way back up to the top, then you can use this green symbol. It says rotate it for free. And so if you don't want to upgrade it, instead you can rotate it, and you put it down like this. And so now you have a wood and a fish resource that you can use in future cards. So let's say I want to use this fish. I can use it to upgrade this card. That fish says if you spend a fish, you can rotate the card. So I will set this one back up, and that'll spin that fish to rotate this card. And so now when this one comes around, I can use it to produce 2 more fish. Every time you play a card, you'll have 1 card here, 1 card might be sitting in your other hand, but going through this, you'll be producing resources, upgrading these different cards. You'll be able to eventually get to the point that you'll start producing points, which you can see right there. And as you upgrade things enough, you'll start getting lots and lots of points, hoping to hit some arbitrary goal that you'll set for yourself. But it's a great game to play like when you're sitting in the car waiting for someone, because you can just be going through these decks, and if you get to the point that you need to take a break, it's okay, because this card sort of saves your place. If you just take the deck as you have it and put it in the wallet, you might be on round 3 or you might be on round 8, which is the very last round. But when you take this card, this stack out of the wallet, you can see exactly where you are. You know how far away from the end you are, so you can always just pick up the game and start going. It's a wonderful game that I usually just play solo. Again, just sitting in the car waiting for someone. But within the game, they've actually got another deck, just like the one that I just used, to make it into a 2-player game. And what'll happen is you will have some cooperative objectives, or you will have some competitive objectives. All of these are various upgrades or objective cards that, as you and a friend or you by yourself are building up these resources, you can use those resources to achieve certain goals. And if you achieve those goals first in the competitive version, then you will win. If they achieve them first, then they will win. Or there's cooperative version that you're trying to work together, you and your partner, to achieve certain goals. Or there are feats, which are other cards that you can add to your deck. And for example, this feat is achieved if you score at least 40 during your game. If you score 40 during your game, now you can put this in your deck for the next game that you play, so that the next game you'll have some particular advantage that you can use in future games. There's a whole series of goals you can play, or you could just be trying to get a certain score. Here's the generalized score goals. If you get 10 to 19, it needs work. 20 to 29 is okay. 30 to 39 is great, and 40 or more is an astounding score. I think I've only hit the 40 one time, and I've played this game several dozen times. Only hit that outstanding or the astounding the once, but it's still a blast to play, and the whole game fits in this little box. Plays 1 or 2 people, or if you're just playing it by yourself, you could just leave this box at home, take this, stick it in your pocket, take it wherever you're going. Great game, Palm Island. All right, and so now we come to No Thanks. Unlike several of the other games that I've recently been talking about, this one is not a solo game. In fact, you need at least 3 players in order to play this game, but it'll scale up to 7 players, which is sort of the feature that this one shines on. You can play it from 3 to 7 players, and it is very simple rules, which makes it so it is accessible for people who love to play games or people that don't play games very often. The basis of the game is there will be some card in the center of the table, and everyone will have some of these chips. They're basically the ability for you to say no thanks on taking this card. If you say okay and you want it, this will go into your possession, and it counts as points against you at the end of the game. But if you don't want to take the card, then you just say no thanks, and you put one of these tokens on the card that's sitting there, and that way you can pass. But eventually you're going to run out of these tokens, and so if I say no thanks, and she says no thanks, and he says no thanks, and they say no thanks, and I say no thanks, and she says no thanks, and he says no thanks, and they say no thanks, eventually someone's going to need to take it. But there's also an advantage, because I mentioned these cards will count as points, and you don't like points. These tokens count against that point score. So they're like -1 points each one. So eventually you're going to get enough of these tokens that you're like, I guess I'll take them. And so you take the card, but now you have a lot more ability to pass on the cards you don't want in the future. As more cards come out, other people will be taking these cards, and at some point you might end up they wouldn't all end up here. They all end up going to someone before the next card comes out. I'm just looking for a 15 or a 17, because when you get to the point that you take a card and it is sequential to a card you already have. For example, this 15, if you put a 15 with a 16, you only get the points for the lowest one in the sequence. And so if they took the 15, it'll be 15 points. But if you've already got the 16 and you take the 15, it's actually saving you a point. Because in this whole column, this whole series of numbers, you're only scoring the lowest in a set. If you get the 16, 15, 14, and 18, then your score is going to be 18 plus 14, minus however many chips you have at the end. But if somehow you can get the 17, which may or may not even be in that game, you never know, because you're going to take out some of the cards before you start playing. But if you can ever get that 17, then it'll turn that into all one big sequence, and you'll end up only costing you 14 points instead of 14 plus 18. So there's some risk, there's some guesswork, there's some social dynamic, because you're trying to convince other people to take the cards you don't want, and you're trying to get just the cards that you want, and it's a lot of fun. It takes only a couple minutes to teach, maybe only about 20 minutes to play the game. And again, I love it just because of how accessible it is, how easy it is to learn, but it also fills the role of a game that's expandable up to 7 people. Sometimes small games are only going to be a solo game or just a couple people, but this small game that'll still fit in your pocket, you can play even if you've got half a dozen people. So again, wonderful game called No Thanks. Next on the list of small games that may or may not fit in your pocket is The Blood of an Englishman. Sounds a little creepy, but it's just the story of Jack and the Beanstalk and the Giant. And one of his key things that he says is, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." And so there's the title. But this is a 2-player game from the theme of Jack and the Beanstalk. The box might not fit in your pocket, but the entire game fits in just these deck of cards. So the game, even if the box won't fit in your pocket, the game will probably fit in your pocket if you decide to put it in like a sandwich bag or what have you. This game's probably going to be one of the harder ones to explain because of the fact that it takes a little bit of setup. There's going to be several rows of cards representing different parts of the beanstalk, and the giant has a goal, and the person who plays Jack has a goal. The giant is trying to get the words fee, fi, fo, and fum to be all together, either this way or across the front. And the person that plays Jack is trying to collect numbers in ascending order. So you might somehow get a 1 and a 2 and a 5 and a 7, 8, and 9. And once you get 6 of those cards, you can put one of these treasures on top, and it's like going up the beanstalk and grabbing a treasure. But while Jack is trying to collect those cards to put together 3 beanstalks full of treasure, the giant is trying to get fee, fi, fo, and fum all together. And so as Jack grabs more cards from the center, he's not only working towards his goal, but he's sort of helping the giant work towards his goal. The Jack and the giant each have their own way of movement. Jack has 3 moves per turn, and they're pulling cards from the back of the beanstalk or from the front of the beanstalk or moving things around. Whereas the giant has only 1 action. He can move exactly 4 cards at the same time. He can move a couple cards individually, or he can just take one of the cards from anywhere in that collection, that beanstalk, and he can just take that card out of the game. So the giant has these slow, lumbering, large moves he can do. Jack has these quick, nimble, not very powerful, but lots of moves he can do. And over the course of your game, you're going back and forth. Jack's being nimble, the giant's being slow and lumbering. They're both working through the beanstalks to try to meet their goals. And a lot of the time, this game will end up where both people playing think that they are 1 move away from winning, and then someone does something unexpected and ends up taking the win right out from under the other person. My wife and I really love this game. It's highly strategic and competitive, and yet again, it's a small game, but it's a wonderful game. I highly recommend it, The Blood of an Englishman. The next game on the list of pocket games is Mr. Jack Pocket. The theme is Sherlock and Watson and their dog Toby trying to figure out who is Mr. Jack. And in seriousness, Mr. Jack is supposed to be like Jack the Ripper, But since that makes this game sound a lot creepier, I just call him Mr. Jack throughout this so that it stays more family friendly. And so, it's the story of Sherlock Holmes and Watson and their dog Toby, and they are going to be walking through a neighborhood. One player will be playing the part of Mr. Jack, trying to stay hidden. The other player will be playing the investigators. The person who's trying to stay hidden will draw a card to see which one of these characters is actually Mr. Jack. This one down here. In this case, they'll keep that hidden, and the other player will be slowly but surely moving these characters around, trying to see if they can find out who Mr. Jack is. The way they do that is on any given turn, these options are put out. One player will choose 2, the other player will choose 2. If they play this, for example, let's say the investigator chooses this, it means that they can look at one of these cards and rule that person out. So by doing that, I know this person is not it. So I've narrowed down the suspects. Or maybe I'll choose this, which lets me rotate a card, a tile. So I'll rotate this to make it so I can see more things, maybe. Or I might play this, which is Toby. This lets me move him 1 or 2 spaces over. There's different ones on the other sides. It lets you swap the places of 2 tiles. So you could move these. So again, the one person that's playing Mr. Jack is going to be choosing 2 of these, and the person who is being Sherlock and Watson and Toby are going to choose 2 of these. And after everyone is chosen their 2, then the investigator will ask the person playing Mr. Jack, can any of the investigators see you? And that answer, yes or no, will let the investigator figure out who they can eliminate from the suspects list. For example, if they were in this situation right now and the investigator asked, can they see you, then the person playing Mr. Jack will say yes, because this is Mr. Jack. And so anyone who is visible by one of the investigators will stay flipped upright, and anyone who is not visible from the perspective of these investigators will get flipped over. Toby cannot see this guy because of this wall, so we flip this one over. No one can see him. No one can see him. But Sherlock can see all 3 of these because the road goes straight through. He would get flipped over. She would get flipped over. And so by this point, it has been very narrowed down. And the game is played over 8 rounds. And so the person playing Mr. Jack has to use these options very carefully to make it so either a lot of people stay visible by the investigators, or a lot of people stay not seen by the investigators. Because if, for example, if everyone would have been not seen, and the investigator says, can my investigator see you? He would have said no. And so the only people that would have been flipped over are the ones that they can see. But maybe you've made it so that they can only see one person, or they can't see anybody. And so it makes it a lot harder to rule out who is who. Again, the game lasts 8 rounds. At the beginning, when you're first learning this game, it's going to be very hard for Mr. Jack to win. That's one reason why my wife and I really like this game, because she really likes to win, and I just like to play. And so she plays Sherlock and Watson and Toby, and I play as Mr. Jack, so that it's a lot harder for me, but we're both having a lot of fun. And so if that kind of a situation sounds good to you, where it's harder for one person than the other, then this game might be one for you. Again, Mr. Jack Pocket is really small, makes a great lunchtime break game. When my wife and I worked at the same place, we would take this game and we would break it out at lunch so that we can play a little 10 or 15 minute game and get some fun strategy, not taking a lot of time, not taking a lot of space, and we'd usually get questions on, what are you doing, guys? But all that being said, it's a great game. Again, I recommend Mr. Jack Pocket. And the last game on this list of great games that will fit in your pocket is Love Letter. But something I want to point out before I start talking about this game is that this list is in no particular order. It's not from best to worst. It's not from worst to best. It's not in alphabetical order. Each of these games serves a particular purpose. One game might be because it's a great lunchtime game. Another one because it's great for playing at the park. Another because you want to play a solo deck builder, etc. Another because you just want to build a city. All of these games are wonderful games, but I'm unable to choose which one is best. That being said, I really like Love Letter. One of the reasons I like it is because it's pretty easy to teach, and even people who aren't normally board gamers tend to still really like this game. In this game, there are 8 different people that you might be, 8 different roles, as it were. And each person's going to have one of these lists of roles so that you can try to figure out who the other person is or who they have in their hand. So on your turn, you'll have some character, they'll have some character, they'll have some character, and you will draw a card, and you will choose one of those cards to do their action. And based on using that action, you're going to try to figure out who the other person has in their hand. So whenever it's not your turn, you'll only have one card in your hand. This one, for example, says you and another player will secretly compare hands. The player with the lowest value is out of the round. Let's see if it'll focus. Oh well. So if I play that card, then I would choose a player, and we'll show each other what our cards are. Since their card is a lower number than mine, now they're out for this round. So now it's just me and this person right here. And so I've played my turn. I have one card left. They don't know who it is, but they just saw me compare and beat someone with a 1. So they know my other card is not a 1. When it's their turn, they'll draw a card, and they've got a prince. We've got a prince and a king, and each of those cards has a different ability. The king can make you trade hands with another player. The prince can make any player, including yourself, discard his or her card. And so let's say he decides he's going to play the prince. And since I'm the only person left, I have to discard my card. So I discard my other one and redraw. So he doesn't know what I've got, but he may have ruined a plan that I had. Comes back around on my turn. I'll draw a card. And these two, one is the countess and one is the prince. So as you notice, there are multiple princes in the deck. But the Countess's special ability is if you have this card and the king or prince in your hand, you must discard this card. And so that's the one I'm going to discard. And so this person sees that I have discarded the Countess and will know that there's a pretty good chance I either had the prince or the king or the princess in my hand. The reason if I had the princess I might have discarded the Countess is because the princess is worth 8. It has a value of 8. And its special ability is if you discard this card, you are out of the round. And so the other person sees that I discarded the Countess, and so they say, well, I've got a pretty good idea who they have. And then later on, if they drew a guard, for example, it says name a non-guard card and choose another player. If that player has that named card, he or she is out of the round. And so they might use the knowledge that they've gained by the things I've discarded or by the things that I did or did not play to figure out who I have. And then they might pull out a guard, say, you've got the princess. And I'm required to get rid of it, losing me that round. So when he or she is the only person left in the round, then they would get one of these little tokens called a favor token or something to that effect. And when you get the right amount of tokens, you have won the game. So you might get kicked out of the first round really quick, but you still might come back to win the game. In a 3-player game, you will play to like 5 tokens. In a 4-player game, whoever gets to 4 tokens first wins. It's a wonderful game. One thing that's my favorite part about this game is that my in-laws like it. And if you have a game you really like to play with your in-laws, then that's super, because it's always fun to hang out with people doing things that they like. And so this game, again, is Love Letter. Great small game, easy game to learn. Doesn't take too much brains, but it takes a little bit of brains, so it'll keep you fresh. You can play this at a restaurant while you're waiting for your food, or any place where you can have a deck of cards in your hand. Wonderful game, tiny game, fit in your pocket. Love Letter.